Welcome to Life Stories, where we dive into the journeys of resilience, transformation, and the power of choice. Today, we follow the story of Ethan Carter, a man who, after discovering his wife's betrayal, embarks on a journey of personal growth, revenge, and rebuilding his life. As he navigates the pain of betrayal and the complexities of family, Ethan learns profound lessons about love, strength, and moving forward. Join us as we explore how the past can shape us, but it is ultimately our choices that define who we become. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and start the story with us today. I had just wrapped up a busy day of coding when I decided to call it a night early. It was 6:30 p.m., much earlier than I expected, and a quiet satisfaction spread over me. I hadn't anticipated finishing my work so soon, but there it was. Another problem solved and another day complete. I leaned back in my office chair, stretching my stiff back, the kind of stretch that comes from hours spent hunched over a computer screen. At 41, I still maintained the lean frame of my younger years, but the small wrinkles around my eyes were now a clear indication of the time spent locked in my work, of the sacrifices I had made to build the life I had. I gathered my laptop with my usual precision, placing everything neatly in my bag as if each motion were calculated. There was something satisfying in this order, something that made the chaos of my job bearable. The hotel room, typically disordered after a long day of business, was an exception tonight. I had packed it with the same care I used when preparing for a meeting, neat and organized. The rain, typical Seattle weather, drummed against the window of my hotel room as I grabbed my bags and left. The drive home would take about 30 minutes, and I used the time to think about the weekend. Maybe I could surprise Emily by taking the kids to that new museum Alina had mentioned. She was always so enthusiastic about new things, and her curiosity seemed to mirror my own. Maybe we could even take Caspian to the aquarium. At 10, he still had that innocent wonder in his eyes, fascinated by the world around him. It warmed me to think about their faces lighting up when I walked in through the door. By the time I reached our suburban home, the rain had stopped, and the two-story house stood elegantly under the darkening sky. Its windows glowed warmly, casting light into the evening. I grabbed my bags and made my way to the front door, taking the stone path with the ease of routine. I didn't want to wake them, so I unlocked the door quietly and stepped inside. The familiar scent of lavender candles filled the air, the kind Emily always lit in the evening to create that soothing atmosphere. But as I set my bags down, I noticed something strange. The music drifting from upstairs was not the classical pieces Emily usually played. Instead, it was modern, with a heavy beat, something I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to call out to her, but I held back. Perhaps she was busy with something, and I didn't want to disturb her. So I climbed the stairs, my hand brushing the polished wood of the banister. As I reached the top of the stairs, I saw the door to our master bedroom slightly ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling into the hallway. I pushed the door open further, planning to announce my early return. But then I heard Emily's voice, though it wasn't directed at me. It stopped me in my tracks. She was on the phone, laughing in a way I'd never heard before. The lightness of her tone was laced with something else, something sharp and calculating. "He's so predictable," she said, unaware of my presence. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "A walking bank account," she continued. "Robert, baby, just wait. Once the divorce is final, I'll be free and I'll have everything." I stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my chest. For a moment, the world around me seemed to blur, my mind trying to process what I had just heard. But I didn't rush in. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I listened. I retreated back into the shadows of the hallway, stepping carefully, silently. Through the crack in the closet door, I saw Emily's reflection in the bedroom mirror. She was grinning, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. "No," she said, almost to herself, before continuing. "Yes, of course, I've thought it through. I've been planning this for months. The lawyer says I'll get half of everything, including his company shares." Her words echoed in my mind as if she were speaking directly to me. I felt my heart rate slow as my mind began to cool. I was no longer the man I had been just moments before. My emotions, which would have once surged through me, were now tempered with a calm precision. I was gathering information, every word a data point, every pause an opportunity for me to prepare. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't just about her finding comfort in another man. It was the cold calculation, the months of deception, and the plan to take everything from me, my money, my company, and even the children. I didn't react. I didn't shout or storm out. Instead, I stayed silent and composed, backing away quietly, walking back down the stairs. I grabbed my bags, slipped out the front door, and sat in my car, my hands steady on the steering wheel. I would drive around for an hour, giving myself time to think, to strategize. There was no rush. I couldn't afford to let emotion dictate my actions. An hour later, I returned home, slipping back inside as though nothing had changed. I kissed Emily on the cheek, hugged the kids, and went about my evening as if everything was perfectly normal. But inside, I was already planning the next steps. The war had begun, but it wouldn't be a war of rage or sorrow. No, this was going to be a calculated strategic response. Emily had made her choices, and now it was my turn. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate performance. I went to work, came home, and played my role as a devoted father. Caspian, with his wide-eyed innocence, and Alina, whose intelligence seemed to grow with each passing day, both gave me small moments of joy that made it all feel worthwhile. I did everything to ensure their routines stayed unchanged. I helped with homework, attended soccer games, and pretended everything was normal, even though my world was anything but. Meanwhile, Emily was playing her own part, though I could see the cracks starting to show. The divorce proceedings had begun. She moved forward with the legal process, seeking counsel and making sure everything was neatly lined up, just as she had with everything else in her life. But I wasn't about to make this easy for her. I had been gathering evidence, collecting every detail of her actions with methodical precision. It was all part of the plan. When the papers were finally served, I sat quietly with them in my hands, reading through each page. Emily's lawyer had outlined the terms of the divorce, a standard procedure for most marriages ending in separation, but this was no standard divorce. This was a battle. The things she didn't know were buried beneath the words on the paper. The things she thought she had hidden so well were now part of the game I was playing. During this time, Emily had become increasingly erratic, trying to manipulate the situation. She would call about the children, speak to them in the most saccharine tones, but it felt hollow, as if the love she had once had for them was now a distant memory. It was as though she was trying to buy their affection, filling them with gifts and promises of trips, a temporary distraction to mask her true intentions. But the kids weren't fooled, especially Alina, who saw through her facade with an almost painful clarity. I didn't stop her from visiting. I didn't try to play the role of the bitter ex-husband, no matter how much I wanted to. Instead, I let her have her time with the children, keeping the peace, at least outwardly. But inside, I was biding my time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Then came the custody battle, the defining moment. Emily's lawyer tried to paint me as an absentee father, someone who was too focused on his career to be emotionally available. But the truth was far different. The children had always come first for me, and I had always made sure to be there for them, even if Emily had been the one to often put her own interests ahead of them. I had the proof, the records, the photos, the receipts, all of it. When the judge ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody of both Alina and Caspian, I felt no triumph. The children's well-being had always been my primary concern, and now I had the opportunity to keep them safe, to raise them with love and stability. Emily was granted weekend visitation, but that too was contingent upon her compliance with the divorce terms. That night, after the ruling, I sat alone in my office, a glass of water in hand, thinking. Emily had lost, but it wasn't her loss that mattered to me. It was the children's future. The divorce wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about giving them the chance to live without the toxicity that had poisoned our home for so long. As I looked at the papers in front of me, I realized that this wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't about hurting Emily, though in some ways, that had been a tempting thought. No, this was about ensuring fairness, about protecting the children from a woman who had deceived them all. My emotions were cold, controlled, just as they had been when I first learned of her betrayal. The battle wasn't over, but I was one step closer to the peace I had been seeking. 6 months had passed since the divorce was finalized. Emily was in Chicago now, trying to build a new life, and while I'd never wish her ill, I couldn't help but feel the relief that came with the distance between us. Alina and Caspian were doing well, their lives slowly returning to a sense of normalcy. I had become a father in the truest sense of the word, and every day felt like a small victory. The house was different now. It felt lighter, free from the undercurrent of tension that had once suffocated it. I had redecorated parts of it with input from the kids. Alina helped pick out colors, and Caspian insisted on a new puppy, a golden retriever named Rex, who had quickly become part of our family. It was strange, in a way, how quickly the house had gone from a place of sorrow to one of warmth and comfort. I'd also changed. The man I was a year ago, full of anger and vengeance, seemed like a distant memory. I had moved past that. The revenge I once sought, the intricate plans and carefully calculated moves, had been necessary for a time, but they no longer held any power over me. What mattered now was the present, the future. My future and the future of my children. It wasn't just the house that had changed. My relationship with Alina and Caspian had deepened. Alina had become more of a partner in life, her sharp intellect guiding our conversations, and Caspian, though still young, had a joy and optimism that never failed to remind me of what truly mattered. Their laughter, their questions, their eagerness to learn, it filled the house with a kind of energy I hadn't realized was missing before. And then there was Leah. She had come into our lives almost by accident. I had met her at a tech conference, and over time, our conversations had turned from professional matters to personal ones. She was kind, intelligent, and had an effortless way of making me laugh, of making everything feel less heavy. What started as a friendship had blossomed into something more. Leah was everything Emily hadn't been: genuine, honest, and unwaveringly supportive. She never asked about the past. She simply embraced the future. And in her presence, I found a kind of peace I hadn't thought possible. She was good for me, and more importantly, she was good for my children. When she came over for dinner, it was like everything finally clicked. Alina, who had been wary of anyone new in our lives, warmed to her. Caspian, too, adored her. They saw in Leah something I had been hoping for, a steady, loving presence that filled the spaces Emily had left behind. Still, there were moments when I'd look back at what had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the months of planning and strategy. The scars, though healing, would always be there. But I no longer carried them with bitterness. They had shaped me, yes, but they didn't define me anymore. One evening, as we all together at the dinner table, Caspian excitedly talking about his soccer game and Alina discussing her latest coding project, I realized something. This was my family now, the family I had always hoped for, the one I had fought so hard to protect. The past, with all its pain and deception, was behind me, and in its place was a future that was mine to shape, one built on love, trust, and the simple joy of being present in the moment. The lessons I had learned, the ones that had come through the hardest of times, weren't just about how to survive betrayal. They were about how to rebuild, how to take what's broken and piece by piece create something new, something better. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It never truly had been. It was about moving forward, about choosing peace over bitterness, and about realizing that in the end, love is the only thing that matters. As the months passed, life took on a new rhythm. The pain and bitterness that had once consumed me seemed to fade, replaced by something far more powerful: peace. The past no longer had a grip on me. It had taught me lessons I would carry for the rest of my life, but I wasn't defined by it. I was no longer the man who had plotted revenge or sought retribution. Instead, I was a father, a partner, and a man who had rebuilt his life from the ground up. Alina and Caspian had adjusted to their new reality. They were stronger now, their bonds with me growing every day. They weren't just children anymore. They were witnesses to my transformation, and I was proud of them. Together, we had found our footing, and with Leah by our side, our little family was whole again. As for Emily, I didn't wish her harm. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The distance between us was the best thing for all of us. It had given us the space to heal, to move forward. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control where I went from here. And where I was going was a place of hope, not anger. I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the city. The future was unwritten, full of possibilities. I had no regrets. The journey had been long, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. The best revenge, I had learned, wasn't in destroying the past. It was in building a future filled with love, strength, and joy. Thank you for following this life story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories of resilience and transformation.